Previously, a mercenary named Riven Marr rode into a cursed village. Every soul he encountered had no face. Smooth skin where features should be. And yet, he stayed. This is the Curse of the Faceless Village. Part 2. The Curse. Near the green stood an inn with a hanging sign. A painted stag, antlers wide, flaking with age. The door was open, warm light spilling out. The smell of stew drifted, and for a moment it felt almost normal. But until a faceless woman stepped into the doorway with a towel in her hands. She inclined her head. Riven's voice came out quieter than he intended. "Can you speak?" No reply. The woman lifted a hand and pointed toward a bench under the inn's eave, a silent offer of shelter. Riven hesitated. Then, because rain and war had both taught him that refusing shelter was sometimes worse than accepting it, he nodded once and stepped under the eave. The woman returned inside. Riven leaned his back against the wall and watched the village. They moved around him as though he were a stone in the road. No panic, no shouting, no attempt to bar doors. Just careful distance, as if they were used to strangers and had decided he was another problem to endure quietly. A man crossed the green carrying a bucket. A child, yes, there, small and slight, followed him with quick steps. The child had no face either. Riven looked away, forcing himself to focus on the practical. If these people could not speak, they could not bargain. If they could not see, how did they avoid tripping? If they had no mouths, how did they eat? Unless the curse was illusion, unless the faces were hidden by enchantment, unless a voice touched his mind. Not sound, not words spoken aloud. Something cooler and sharper, like a fingertip pressed to a bruise. "You have a sword." Riven went rigid. His eyes darted, scanning the green. No one seemed to react. The villagers continued their slow tasks. "Do not draw it here." The thought came again, clearer. "Not unless you want them to wake." Riven's hand tightened on the reins. "Who said that?" he demanded aloud. No one turned. Then, "Inside the chapel. Come." Riven's heart hammered. He forced himself to keep his face neutral, as soldiers did when arrows fell, as mercenaries did when kings lied. He did not want to appear frightened. Fear drew wolves. Fear drew worse. He pushed away from the wall and began to lead his mare across the green. The villagers watched him without eyes. Rain ran down the mare's flank in rivulets. Mud sucked at Riven's boots. Each step felt like walking deeper into a dream that wanted to become a nightmare. The chapel door was ajar. Riven paused at the threshold. Inside was dim and smelled of wet stone and old incense. Rows of wooden pews sat empty. At the far end stood the altar, a simple slab, and behind it a faded mural of a saint whose face had been painted over, erased into a pale smear. A figure sat in the front pew, still as carved wood. Riven's hand drifted toward his sword again as he stepped in. The figure stood. It was a young woman. No, not quite. Her body was slender, her hair long and braided, but her movements were too smooth, too measured, like a dancer trained never to falter. She wore a cloak the color of deep water, damp at the edges, and a silver thread banded her brow. And unlike the others, she had something where her face should be. Not features, not eyes or mouth, but a faint pattern, like the suggestion of a face pressed beneath skin, as if someone had drawn a portrait and then stretched flesh over it. Subtle ridges where a nose should be, shallow hollows where eyes might sit. A half-remembered face. Riven stopped 3 paces away. "You spoke," he said. Her head angled, listening, not with ears perhaps, but with the invisible attention that had brushed his mind. "Yes, not with a mouth, with what my people carry." Riven frowned. "Your people?" "I am Vera." A pause, like a breath he could not hear. "My mother was of the Vale-born. My father was of this village. That is why I can speak in thought, and they cannot." Riven had heard stories in taverns, half-drunk tales of bloodlines that carried strange gifts. The Vale-born, who could walk in dreams. The glass-eyed, who saw spirits in mirrors. The mind-touched, who heard lies the way other men heard thunder. He had always assumed those stories were exaggerations used to sell ale. Yet here he stood, mind-touched by another's voice. Riven kept his stance loose, ready. "Why call me here?" Vera's hands lifted, palms open, showing emptiness. A gesture of peace. "Because you are not of this place. Because you still have a face." Her mind voice tightened on the last word, carrying something like grief. "Because you have a sword, and swords are honest. They only kill when the wielder sees fit." Riven glanced toward the mural behind the altar, the saint erased. "What happened?" Vera's head dipped, as if the question weighed too much for her neck. "A kindness. Bitter. A bargain. A curse disguised as mercy." Riven waited. Outside, rain hissed against stone. The chapel seemed to press in, holding secrets in its damp breath. Vera stepped closer, and the air around her prickled, like standing near a storm. This village was called Lark Hollow. The words formed in his mind alongside images: summer fields, children running, faces laughing. We were poor. We were ordinary. We prayed to saints who did not answer, and paid taxes to lords who did not care. Riven could feel the old familiar shape of peasant life in those thoughts. Hunger, work, fear of winter. Then the sickness came. The image shifted, bodies sweating, coughing, lying in straw. The red lung. It took breath first, then voice. People choked on their own blood. Mothers watched children turn blue. Riven's jaw clenched. He'd seen plague villages. He'd seen desperate men do desperate things. Veyra's thought voice trembled. They would have died. All of them. My father included. Riven asked, "And someone offered a cure?" "Yes." The word was heavy as a gravestone. A woman came from the forest when the bells rang for the dead. She wore a hood stitched with crow feathers. Her hands were stained green, as if she had crushed herbs. Or hearts. A witch, Riven thought. The old kind. Not the harmless hedgewives who brewed sleep tea, but the ones whispered about in winter stories. Veyra's mind supplied the name without being asked. Mother Nim. Riven felt the name catch in his bones. Mother, he repeated aloud. Not witch. Veyra turned slightly toward the chapel window, rainwater streaking the glass. She called herself what she wished, and the desperate called her anything that meant savior. Riven said nothing. She offered a bargain to the priest and the elders. Images, men kneeling, hands clasped, faces wet with tears. She said she could pull the sickness out like a thorn. She said the village would be spared. But she wanted a payment. Not coin, not blood. Riven shifted his weight, feeling the floorboards creak beneath him. What payment? Veyra's thought came like a cold blade laid against his throat. She wanted their faces. Riven stared at her. Faces? Not skin, not eyes. Identity. Self. The thing that makes you you when you look into water and know it is your reflection. Riven's mouth went dry. They agreed. Veyra's mind voice cracked with a grief that had no tears. Because death was worse. Because they believed they could outwit a forest witch. Because they thought a face was a small price if their children lived. Riven had seen men trade honor for bread, trade daughters for protection, trade faith for wine. He moved to one of the pews and lowered himself onto its edge, keeping his hand near his sword. The wood groaned. Veyra's hands clenched. Mother Nim sang. She walked the streets at midnight with a lantern that burned blue. She touched each door with her fingers, and when her hand pulled away, she carried something invisible, like a veil of heat. Riven's mind filled with an image of a woman carrying an armful of unseen masks. By dawn, the coughing stopped. The red lung vanished. And when the villagers came out to thank her, they could not speak. They could not smile. They could not even cry where anyone could see. Their faces were smooth as eggs. Riven exhaled slowly. Why are they alive at all? What does she gain? Veyra's thought arrived with quiet fury. She feeds on the stolen. A dark forest, a hut of woven roots, shelves lined with jars that held something pale and shimmering. She uses faces the way priests use relics, power stored in the shape of a person. Riven stared at the erased saint on the wall. And the priest? Veyra's attention turned to the mural. He tried to fight her. He invoked the saint of true names. And she erased the saint's face, too. Riven felt a coldness spread through his chest. A curse that could erase even holy images was no parlor trick. He asked, "Why do they still walk? Why do they work like this?" Veyra's answer slid into his mind like a chain. Because she left them a purpose. Images of villagers shuffling, building, sweeping, drawing water peer into Riven's mind. She told them, "Live, serve, keep the village tidy for my return." Riven's hand tightened on his sword hilt until the leather creaked. So they're puppets. Not fully. Veyra's thought softened. Some part remains, a flicker. That is why they watch you. That is why they gathered when you came. They remember what it is to see someone with a face. It hurts them. It reminds them what was taken. Riven swallowed. He thought of the child following the man with the bucket. A child who could not smile, could not beg, could not scream. "Why can you speak?" he asked again, needing the detail, needing to believe there was a seam in this curse, a place to pry. Veyra's fingers touched the silver thread on her brow. The Veilborn were made long ago as servants of dream and thought. She sent him an image. A people with pale eyes, walking under moonlight, speaking without tongues. Mother Nim's curse was built for ordinary souls. Souls that anchor themselves in faces and names. My blood does not anchor the same way. The curse slid off me. Not completely. She turned slightly, and in the dim chapel light, Riven saw the faint ridges of features beneath her smooth skin. A face trying to exist, not quite succeeding. Riven's mercenary instincts, practical, suspicious, stirred. "If you can speak, why haven't you left? Why not run to a lord, a priesthood, a mage?" Veyra's reply was immediate, sharp. "Because the roads do not let you." The chapel seemed to darken. Riven turned, scanning the doorway, the windows. Veyra sent him the image. The road he'd taken, twisting in on itself like a serpent. A traveler walking for hours, only to find themselves back at the village's edge. Tracks circling like a trap. Mother Nim sealed Lark Hollow. Veyra's thought carried dread. No one leaves unless she allows it. You entered because you have not yet been claimed. But now that you are here, you are inside her net. Riven's pulse kicked. He forced himself not to show panic. Panic made you stupid. "How do you know?" he asked. Veyra's hands trembled slightly. "Because I tried." She sent him the memory. Herself running through rain, breath burning, pushing through trees, the forest shifting, paths folding, hours later, collapsing on the same roadstone that said "turn back," as if mocking her. Riven's jaw set. "You want me to kill her," he said. Veyra's thought did not deny it. "I want my father back. I want their faces back. I want the village to remember itself." A pause, softer. "And if you do not help, she will take yours too." Trapped. The roads twist back on themselves. The forest obeys the witch. And Riven Marr has walked into a cage. A cage where faces are currency, and his is worth more than most. But there may yet be a way out, a plan, a name, a weakness. And tonight, Mother Nim will send a gift. Part 3, The Bargain, coming soon. Smash that like button, comment on your thoughts of this tale so far, and subscribe to keep the channel growing. Thanks to all that have helped this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. Oh, and don't forget about that damn notification bell, so you can keep up to date with my newest videos. Until next time, stay in the shadows.